Jamal fidgeted with his fingers, unsure how to respond. "I didn't do anything special," he mumbled. "I just thought no one should be alone on their birthday." Richard studied him closely. The boy's humility struck him. He had expected some trace of pride, maybe even hope for a reward. But Jamal looked almost embarrassed by the attention. That honesty only deepened Richard's respect. "I want to do something for you," Richard said at last. "Your kindness deserves recognition." Jamal's grandmother put down her teacup, wary. "We didn't come to your mansion for favors. We only believe in doing what's right." Richard nodded slowly, humbled again. He cleared his throat. "Then let me put it this way. I want to invest in the kind of heart your grandson has. Education, opportunities, anything he dreams of. Not because I pity him, but because the world needs more people like him." Jamal looked up, his eyes wide. "Really? You'd do that for me?" Richard leaned forward. "You did more for my daughter in one evening than I could in months. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Money can't buy love. And she needs a friend more than anything." From that day on, Jamal began visiting the mansion regularly. At first, the staff whispered about him, this boy in simple clothes walking through marble halls, but Sophia welcomed him every time with an excited squeal. "Jamal!" she'd cry, clapping her hands as he entered. He always had something to share, a funny story, a silly drawing, sometimes just his company. They spent hours together. He pushed her wheelchair through the garden paths, pretending it was a racing car. She laughed so hard the roses shook with her joy. He taught her clapping games his grandmother had shown him, and she taught him how to sketch the koi fish in her father's pond. Sometimes they just sat in her room, inventing stories about magical lands where nobody was ever left out. The housekeepers noticed Sophia's glow returning. The CEO noticed too. His daughter wasn't looking at the door anymore, waiting for people who never came. She was fully present, her laughter echoing through the halls like it used to, and all because one boy had said, "Can I?" Richard began joining them sometimes, sitting quietly in the garden as Sophia and Jamal played. He found himself laughing, not as a CEO, but as a father. It had been so long since joy had filled his home naturally. One Saturday afternoon, as Sophia and Jamal shared slices of pie in the kitchen, she asked him suddenly, "Why did you come that day?" Jamal shrugged. "Because I saw the balloons but no kids, and I thought, if it were me, I wouldn't want to sit alone." Sophia tilted her head, her voice soft. "Weren't you scared? I mean, walking into a mansion like that?" He grinned. "A little. Okay, a lot. Your house is bigger than my whole street. But my grandma always says, don't let fear stop you from being kind. So I just knocked." Sophia's smile wavered, touched. "You're brave." "No," Jamal said firmly. "You're brave. You keep smiling even when people don't show up. That's harder than knocking on a door." Richard, who was listening from the doorway, felt something shift inside him. In boardrooms, bravery was measured in risks and profits. But here, between two children, he witnessed a definition of courage far purer. He realized his daughter wasn't broken. She was fighting every day just to smile. And Jamal, in his simplicity, had seen that more clearly than anyone else. As weeks turned to months, Sophia's world transformed. No longer was her wheelchair a symbol of what she couldn't do, it became the chariot Jamal pushed as they raced down hallways, the throne from which she commanded their imaginary kingdoms. For the first time since her accident, she woke up excited for the day ahead. On her next birthday, Richard tried something different. He still decorated the mansion with balloons and cake, but this time he didn't send invitations to society families or business partners' children. Instead, he asked Sophia whom she wanted there. Without hesitation, she said, "Jamal, and maybe some of his friends." The day came and the mansion looked different, not polished and stiff, but warm and alive. Jamal brought kids from his neighborhood, kids in simple clothes with laughter louder than any string quartet Richard had ever hired. They played games, shared cake, and treated Sophia not as the CEO's daughter, but simply as one of them. That night, Sophia hugged her father tightly. "Daddy, this was the best birthday ever." Richard's throat tightened. For the first time in years, he realized he hadn't just thrown a party, he had given her belonging. Richard found himself spending more time in Jamal's world, too. He visited their neighborhood, met the kids, saw the playgrounds that needed repair, and heard stories of families struggling. For a man who lived in glass towers and boardrooms, it was eye-opening. One evening, he told Jamal's grandmother, "Your grandson reminded me what it means to be human. My wealth built walls around me, but he opened a door." She smiled knowingly. Sometimes God uses the smallest hands to touch the biggest hearts. Richard began funding community programs quietly, not with the flash of a press release, but with genuine intent. A new library appeared in Jamal's neighborhood. Playgrounds were repaired, scholarships offered, but more than money, he showed up. He spoke with parents, played chess with kids, and listened to voices he had ignored for years. Sophia noticed the change. "Daddy, you smile more now. Jamal makes us all better, doesn't he?" Richard kissed her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. He reminded me that love, not money, makes a life full." Years passed, but the bond only deepened. Sophia and Jamal grew together, side by side, facing their teenage years with laughter and courage. Sophia's condition remained, but her spirit soared. She excelled in her studies, inspired by Jamal's determination and honesty. Jamal, with Richard's support, pursued opportunities he never dreamed of: better schools, mentors, and eventually a college scholarship. At Sophia's high school graduation, she delivered a speech from her wheelchair. Her voice rang clear in the auditorium. "People told me I would live in shadows after my accident, but someone once knocked on my door and said, 'Can I?' That question changed my life. It taught me that friendship is stronger than loneliness and kindness is braver than fear." Tears filled Richard's eyes as he watched his daughter beam with pride. Jamal, sitting in the front row, grinned at her like the same boy who once offered a bracelet on her empty birthday. Decades later, people still told the story of the CEO's daughter and the boy who asked the simplest question. Sophia went on to lead charitable foundations for children with disabilities, inspired by her own journey. Jamal became a community leader, never forgetting the mansion door he once knocked on. At a celebration honoring Sophia's work, an old photo was displayed: a little black boy standing nervously in a grand doorway, and a girl in a wheelchair smiling brighter than the sun. The caption read, "The day everything changed." Sophia took the stage, her voice steady with emotion. All it took was one child who wasn't afraid to care. That act of kindness rewrote my story and my father's too. If you ever wonder whether a small gesture matters, remember this: kindness can open doors no key ever could. Jamal stood beside her, the audience applauding, two friends bound not by wealth or circumstance, but by the unshakable truth that love heals more than time, and sometimes the bravest words are simply, "Can I?" The mansion of Richard Hawthorne, one of the most powerful CEOs in the country, was alive with color. Glittering chandeliers hung from ceilings painted with golden swirls. The marble floors shone like mirrors, and everywhere balloons floated against velvet curtains. Caterers rushed in with trays of pastries. Waiters lined crystal glasses on silver tables, and an enormous cake, 3 layers tall, decorated with sugar roses, waited to be cut. Everything was perfect. At least, it looked perfect. But beneath the glamour, a silence lurked, the kind of silence that mocked effort. It was supposed to be Sophia's big day, her 10th birthday. The CEO had spared no expense. He told his assistants, "Make it the party of the year. My daughter deserves the best." And they had obeyed. Yet as the staff moved about, they noticed what was missing. There were no children running around, no little voices filling the mansion, no small hands grabbing balloons. Only empty chairs stood lined up at the long party table. Sophia sat near the end of that table, dressed in a lavender gown. A golden paper crown rested on her head, but it did not glow the way crowns should. She sat quietly in her wheelchair, her tiny fingers twisting nervously at the fabric on her lap. Her eyes, big and hopeful, were fixed on the front doors. She was waiting for laughter, for footsteps, for the friends she had once known so well. Richard stood at a distance, watching her. The man who could command a boardroom, who could silence rivals with a single sentence, felt powerless. His daughter was everything to him, yet no amount of money, power, or persuasion could guarantee her happiness. He clenched his fists in frustration, but when Sophia glanced back at him, he forced a smile. A year ago, Sophia had been unstoppable. She was the brightest girl in her class, running through playgrounds, twirling in dance class, telling stories that made her teachers laugh. Richard used to boast, "She has my energy, but her mother's grace." The accident had taken all that. A rainy night, a sudden skid, and Sophia awoke in a hospital bed to find her legs unmoving. The doctor's words were sharp, final: paralysis from the waist down. At first, Sophia fought to stay herself. She went to school again, smiling bravely. But children are honest in ways that cut deep. Whispers followed her. Some stared, some avoided her, some giggled nervously when she dropped something. Invitations stopped coming. Her best friend didn't sit with her at lunch anymore. Slowly, Sophia grew quiet. Now at her birthday party, the pain was sharper. She had personally handed out the invitations to her classmates, her little heart pounding with hope. They had smiled awkwardly, said maybe, and stuffed the envelopes into their bags. Today, none of them came. Not a single child. The hall, prepared for joy, mocked it with emptiness. Sophia lowered her head, blinking back tears. She whispered to her father, "Maybe they're late." Richard swallowed hard. He wanted to believe her, but the truth weighed heavy. They weren't late. They weren't coming. Parents had made excuses, too busy, out of town, scheduling conflicts. But Richard had heard the real whispers. They didn't want their children to attend. Not a party for a girl in a wheelchair. The CEO's chest tightened. He could conquer empires, but he couldn't force compassion into people's hearts. And here sat his daughter, waiting, her hope draining away with each passing second. By the 3rd hour, the entertainers looked uneasy. The clown adjusted his oversized shoes, juggling silently as though mocking himself. The magician sighed, shuffling his cards pointlessly. The staff shifted trays of untouched food. The grand hall, once prepared for noise, was suffocating in its stillness. Sophia tried to smile, but her lips quivered. Her small voice cracked as she asked, "Daddy, maybe they forgot?" Richard swallowed hard. He wanted to believe her, but the truth weighed heavy. They weren't late. They weren't coming. Parents had made excuses, too busy, out of town, scheduling conflicts. But Richard had heard the real whispers. They didn't want their children to attend. not a party for a girl in a wheelchair. The CEO's chest tightened. He could conquer empires, but he couldn't force compassion into people's hearts. And here sat his daughter, waiting, her hope draining away with each passing second. By the third hour, the entertainers looked uneasy. The clown adjusted his oversized shoes, juggling silently as though mocking himself. The magician sighed, shuffling his cards pointlessly. The staff shifted trays of untouched food. The grand hall, once prepared for noise, was suffocating in its stillness. Sophia tried to smile, but her lips quivered. Her small voice cracked as she asked, "Daddy, maybe they forgot?" Richard swallowed hard. He wanted to believe her, but the truth weighed heavy. They weren't late. They weren't coming. Parents had made excuses, too busy, out of town, scheduling conflicts. But Richard had heard the real whispers. They didn't want their children to attend. Not a party for a girl in a wheelchair. The CEO's chest tightened. He could conquer empires, but he couldn't force compassion into people's hearts. And here sat his daughter, waiting, her hope draining away with each passing second. By the third hour, the entertainers looked uneasy. The clown adjusted his oversized shoes, juggling silently as though mocking himself. The magician sighed, shuffling his cards pointlessly. The staff shifted trays of untouched food. The grand hall, once prepared for noise, was suffocating in its stillness. Sophia tried to smile, but her lips quivered. Her small voice cracked as she asked, "Daddy, maybe they forgot?" Richard swallowed hard. He wanted to believe her, but the truth weighed heavy. They weren't late. They weren't coming. Parents had made excuses, too busy, out of town, scheduling conflicts. But Richard had heard the real whispers. They didn't want their children to attend. Not a party for a girl in a wheelchair. The CEO's chest tightened. He could conquer empires, but he couldn't force compassion into people's hearts. And here sat his daughter, waiting, her hope draining away with each passing second. By the third hour, the entertainers looked uneasy. The clown adjusted his oversized shoes, juggling silently as though mocking himself. The magician sighed, shuffling his cards pointlessly. The staff shifted trays of untouched food. The grand hall, once prepared for noise, was suffocating in its stillness. Sophia tried to smile, but her lips quivered. Her small voice cracked as she asked, "Daddy, maybe they forgot?" Richard swallowed hard. He wanted to believe her, but the truth weighed heavy. They weren't late. They weren't coming. Just as Richard was about to end the party, to spare her the humiliation, a sound broke the silence. A knock at the door. Firm, hesitant, but real. Every head in the room turned. The butler moved to open it. And standing there was not the limo of a wealthy guest, not the child of a business partner, but a boy. He was about Sophia's age, with dark skin and curly hair. His clothes were plain, his shoes scuffed, but his eyes were steady. In his small hands, he held a box, wrapped in reused paper with a little ribbon tied awkwardly. The boy shifted nervously as the tall butler loomed over him. "I saw the balloons," he said quietly. "Is it her birthday?" He pointed to Sophia. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. For the first time that day, her eyes shone. The boy looked directly at her and asked softly, Can I come in?" For a long moment the hall stayed silent. The staff exchanged uncertain glances. The clown froze mid-gesture, The butler cleared his throat, and even the CEO's sharp mind seemed blank. Who was this child? He wasn't on any guest list, not dressed for the occasion, and certainly wasn't from the families Richard usually entertained. The boy looked so small against the golden doorway, yet his words carried a strange courage. Sophia leaned forward in her wheelchair, her crown tilting, as she whispered,